just got back from the best trip of your life. You saw things you dreamed about for years. You ate food so good it made you close your eyes. You met people. You felt free. You felt like the fullest version of yourself. And now you're home. Your suitcase is on the floor. The laundry is undone. Your inbox has 200 emails in it. And you're sitting there in a place that's supposed to feel like home, feeling genuinely, inexplicably sad. Not just tired, not just jet-lagged. Sad. Like something was taken from you. Like the person you were on that trip is already disappearing. You didn't expect this. Nobody warned you about this. And the worst part, the better the trip was, the worse it feels. There's a name for what you're experiencing. Scientists call it post-travel depression, and it's not in your head. Or rather, it is exactly in your head in ways that neuroscience is only beginning to fully understand. Let's start with what's actually happening to your brain while you travel. When you arrive somewhere new, a city you've never seen, a country where you don't speak the language, a street where every smell and sound is unfamiliar, your brain goes into a state that researchers call hyperfocus. Everything is new. Nothing is automatic. Your brain cannot afford to switch off. At home, roughly 47% of your waking hours are spent mind-wandering, according to a Harvard study from 2010. You're physically present, but mentally somewhere else. You drive the same route and don't remember a single turn. You eat lunch and couldn't tell someone what you had. Your brain is essentially running on autopilot, conserving energy by tuning out the familiar. Travel destroys autopilot completely. When you land somewhere new, your brain has to actually process everything. The signs you can't read, the coins you don't recognize, the way the light looks different, the way the air smells different, the fact that you don't know what's around the next corner. Neuroscientists call this environmental novelty, and it triggers a massive release of dopamine. The same chemical your brain releases when you eat something delicious, when you fall in love, when something goes better than you expected. You're not just enjoying your trip, you're chemically altered by it. And here's the problem. You come home, the novelty stops, the dopamine drops, and your brain, which has spent 2 weeks or 2 months flooded with stimulation, suddenly has nothing new to process. The crash isn't metaphorical, it's neurological. But the brain chemistry is only part of the story, because what makes post-travel depression different from other kinds of sadness is something that psychologists have only recently started studying seriously. It's not just that the trip is over, it's that you feel over. In 2013, a pair of researchers at Cornell University named Thomas Gilovich and Amit Kumar published a paper that would go on to become one of the most cited studies in the psychology of happiness. Their finding was simple and kind of devastating. Experiences change us in ways that possessions never do. When you buy something, a car, a phone, a piece of furniture, you adapt to it within weeks. The joy fades, the thing becomes background, but experiences, especially intense ones, become part of who you are. They don't just happen to you, they fold into your identity, which means when a trip ends, it doesn't feel like closing a chapter. It feels like losing a version of yourself. The person who hiked that mountain, the person who got lost in that city and found that restaurant nobody had heard of, the person who stayed up until 3 a.m. on that rooftop talking to strangers who felt like old friends. That person existed vividly and completely for the duration of the trip, and now they're back inside a routine that doesn't have room for them. There's a German word for this, because of course there is. Reisefieber, which means travel fever, is a euphoric state of being on a journey. But the feeling you're describing right now, that ache of return, linguists and travel writers have spent years trying to find a word for it. The closest is a Portuguese concept called Saudade. It means a deep, melancholic longing for something beautiful that has passed, something you loved that is now absent. Not just nostalgia. Nostalgia implies distance and time. Saudade is more immediate, more physical, like the thing you lost is still warm. The fact that cultures have names for this feeling tells you it's not new. Travelers have been coming home and falling into this specific silence for as long as humans have been moving. Homer wrote about it, medieval pilgrims documented it, 19th century explorers described returning from expeditions and feeling, in their own words, like ghosts in their own homes. This is one of the oldest human feelings there is. And for most of history, nobody talked about it because they thought it meant they were ungrateful for what they had. Here's where it gets really interesting. Psychologists who study transitions have identified something they call the identity disruption effect. When a major experience ends, especially one that gave you a clear role and purpose, the brain experiences a version of grief. Not grief for a person, grief for a self. During a trip, your identity is unusually clear. You are the traveler. Everything confirms it. The passport in your pocket, the unfamiliar street, the need to figure things out. You wake up every morning with a built-in sense of purpose. Today, I will explore. Today, I will be present in a way I am almost never present at home. Then you return and the role disappears. You're not the traveler anymore. You're the person who went on a trip once. Past tense. In a 2018 paper published in the journal Emotion, researchers found that the end of a positive experience triggers a neurological pattern that closely resembles grief, even when nothing has been lost in the conventional sense. Which means you're not being dramatic. You're not failing to be grateful. You are, in a very measurable, very documented way, grieving. And then there's the contrast problem, because it's not just that the trip was good, it's that home, by comparison, can suddenly look like a collection of compromises. The commute, the meetings, the routines you never questioned, until you spent 2 weeks without them and realized you felt more alive without them than you felt in years. Psychologists call this contrast effect. When you experience something significantly more intense than your baseline doesn't just feel normal afterward. It feels wrong, like a color you can barely tolerate after living in something brighter. A study from the University of British Columbia found that people reported significantly lower life satisfaction in the 2 weeks after returning from vacation, even when the trip was wonderful, even when nothing had changed at home. The trip didn't ruin your life, it just showed you what your life might feel like if it were different. And that clarity is the hardest part to sit with. So, what do you do with it? Most advice tells you to book the next trip. And sure, that works. Until it doesn't. Until you realize you've been chasing the feeling of arrival forever, using trips like a drug. But there's a more interesting answer buried in the research. Sonia Lyubomirsky at the University of California, who has spent decades studying what actually makes humans happy, found that the travelers who recovered fastest weren't the ones who booked the fastest. They were the ones who integrated. They took the things that made them feel alive on the trip. The wandering, the trying new food, the talking to strangers, and created small versions of those things at home. Not big trips, not expensive gestures, just take a different route. Eat somewhere you've never been. Say yes to something unfamiliar on a Wednesday night. The point isn't to recreate the trip. The point is to remind your brain that novelty isn't something that only exists in airports. But here's the thing, nobody says out loud. Some of the sadness isn't a problem to be solved. Some of it is just the price of having felt something real. The same Harvard study found that people reported significantly higher happiness when they were mentally present, regardless of what they were doing. Washing dishes with full attention beat watching TV on autopilot. Anything beat the drift. Travel forces presence. It doesn't give you a choice. And when it ends, you grieve the presence as much as you grieve the place. The sadness isn't telling you that you need to go back somewhere. It's telling you that you need to show up somewhere. Here, now, the same way you showed up when you were lost on a strange street and everything felt possible. The trip didn't make you someone else. It reminded you who you already are when you're paying attention. For 300,000 years, humans moved. They followed game and seasons and curiosity. The idea of staying in one place forever is almost incomprehensibly recent in the span of human history. Maybe post-travel depression isn't a modern psychological quirk. Maybe it's an ancient signal, the same restlessness that moved our ancestors across continents.